So, yeah. So welcome to Story Street's Striving Novelist Support Group. Uh, I think we have a couple of additional support members who will be streaming in here in a few moments as they can. Um, so we might see Alex and Elisa here. But hopefully, fingers crossed. Anyway, welcome if you end up in the live chat. Um, Good to see everybody. Oh, here's Elisa. Hi, Elisa. Um, so yes, so last week we did not do the traditional for as traditional as we can get after just like whether 3 or 4 weeks of live streaming this. Our traditional striving novelist live stream. But what we did was, and it might be good to have like a little bit of a recap of this in discussions just to see how it went for everybody. We did our kind of a live submission party, and I got something out of it. I think it was great for me, and I know it was great for some people. Hopefully that'll be a good thing that's valuable for people, at home on the live stream as well. So, um, but anyway, we've got, a group here. We can go around the circle, around the table here, and everybody can just talk about their last week, if you would like to. Who would like to go first? Oh, Michelle, you need to unmute, but
Sorry
there we
about
go.
that. After I turned my thesis in, I kind of had a break from writing for a week, but I did spend a lot of time last week after a submission party, which I loved, submitting stories and cleaning up stories a little bit before I sent them off again. So it was productive for that reason, but not in writing further or writing forward.
You're good.
I can go next. I wasn't here last week for the submission. I've been out for 2 weeks, but because I've been working on, I finished 2 manuscripts, one individual and one that I'm co-writing, and I sent my last. I think 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, I sent my personal manuscript out, and last Friday the co-writing thing. So, and then I promised myself that after finishing that, I would give myself a break. So that's what I did. But I did write a lot before that. So I feel good about the progress. And now I'm enjoying. I enjoyed the break, and now I'm gonna go back to writing.
That's crazy timing, by the way, Elisa. It's almost like kind of like a chef or a cook getting everything done at the same time. Like you finishing all of these things at the same time is like a story chef.
It's
Yeah,
like college.
actually, yeah, it wasn't planned. The thing is that I've been working on my novel for a long time, and I was just in the final touches, and then the other project also like jumped out of me, and I had to finish because that was a deadline that we had put on together with my co-writer, so with my writing partner. So it just happened to be that in the span of a week, 2 of my manuscripts were done, and actually like the things that I've been working on for the last I don't know how many years. So yeah, it was actually weird waking up the next day and not having anything pending.
Yeah, I'm still gonna call you the story chef for that. So, it's all right. Who else is going next for this? Hi, Alex. Oh, hey, Margie. Margie's appearing off camera, not feeling well. But who will go next on the last?
I'm happy to jump in. I've been working for a few weeks on something that's highly personal, not for publication, between me and one person, but it's it's very carefully crafted, and it's very thoughtfully done, and it is writing. It's taking all of the writing skills that I've developed in my life to try and make this impactful and clear, without going on too long. And I don't feel bad at all about backseating the my main project,
Mhm.
because this is a writing project, and so and I've made a huge bit of progress this last
Mhm.
week, a few thousand words, which has been a lot for me for the last year. So I'm
That's
calling
good.
that good progress for the week.
Well, that's honestly probably topical for what we were thinking of for a topic today. So that's actually really good. Good good update. So Alex or Margie.
I can jump in. Didn't do any writing really this past week.
Mhm.
Just crazy with some other stuff. I have been thinking about kind of the same thing you're talking about, Jack. Like, what is going towards the writing goal and what's not, you know? Um, and because I was thinking about writing like stand-up sets. I've been playing around
Oh,
with that idea for a long time, but yeah, like I think I've had to face the fact that that is not really for me moving toward the writing goal. So I've kind of stopped
mm.
thinking about that. Um, with a
I
classmate, another
I want
Harvard.
to talk about that though. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, like I've been going back and forth because it feels like writing, but I think I'm realizing that actually for fiction, it would distract from fiction. So, but then with another classmate from Harvard, we're co-writing some sketches. Like we did a sketch writing class, and that feels like that is on the path toward writing. So even though they're both kind of comedy, it's both kind of outside of the fiction realm. Like one feels like it's supporting the goal, and the other one doesn't as much. So I don't know. You saying that, Jack? I've been thinking about that too.
Well,
Okay, I think I
Margie's
figured out how
next.
to turn on my mic. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, so I've been working on revisions to my novel that I turned in for my thesis that I've been working on, and I'm going through my writing group with it chunk by chunk. But I also I had beta readers look at it, and so I'm incorporating some of the concerns they raised, not all of them, because everybody had a different thought. And I had 8 beta readers, and I would say 2 of them are my ideal readers. But the rest all read the type of fiction, but 2 are especially in like, anyhow. And one of them is actually, I got some of the main character from when I was writing. So, so I'm working on that.
Do they know that?
Yes,
Okay.
because I constantly contacted this woman because she worked in tech, and the main character works in tech, and I really needed some authenticity there about certain things. So I constantly contacted her with questions when it applied, because then once she goes to Rome, I don't need her so much. So I did that, but also what I thought was so I'm working on that, and I'm working on it this revision in chunks, just going to certain sections, trying to add new scenes, changing my ending, but not changing it as much as adding on to it, trying to get a little bit of a fun twist into the end of it. What I thought was interesting that I did is the last 2 Sundays, I've been participating in these online discussions for the Kauai Writers Conference. And last night was Jean Kwok, who writes literary thrillers. Generally more like women's fiction, where it tends to have female protagonists always, and there's lots of emotional issues in it. And what was interesting is her new book that she's writing now, that she got a 3-book deal for a romantasy, totally separate genre. And at first, she didn't tell this part on. I know this backstory because she was my teacher at the conference for 4 days. So the backstory is her literary agent was pissed off and told her, I don't represent romantasy, and you're going to have to write under a different name. And she turned her over to another agent there who handles romantasy. Well, the reason Jean did it was because she got a divorce, and she said she didn't have any money. She had to put her kids through college, and she needed some way to support herself, and she needed a good stream of income. So she got a 7-figure deal for her 3-book contract. And that's why she was going to romantasy, because it's more lucrative right now because it's the big deal. So it was really a business decision that drove this. I just think that's fascinating. So I asked her last night on the call, are you publishing under Jean Kwok, or are you publishing under a pen name? And she says she is publishing under Jean Kwok because her publisher is insisting she publish that way, because she's got this big established group of readers who've read her other stories. So it's interesting that she stood firm to what she wanted to do, and she got it, and she didn't have to change anything. So this writing across genres isn't as the barriers aren't. I mean, sure, she's published and all that, but I think you have to be careful about accepting barriers that these gatekeepers are putting up. My other thing is, the weekend before that, I attended. They had 2, and they were both men, 2 literary agents who talked about the querying process. And they were going through all these query letters that people could. I didn't send one in, but they were going through people's query letters. And what was very interesting was that they were saying not exact opposite, but they were giving very different advice. For all the advice I've been following from these other literary agents who are with the shit that about writing and all that, it's called The Shit They Don't Tell You About Writing, that podcast and all of that. They're like, you got to have the plot in there. We don't want to hear themes, this and that. I get from these guys, they want you to start off with your first paragraph needs to grab them, to make them read the whole query letter. So they really want you to grab them in the first paragraph. And then they want some plot. They don't want the amount of plot that these other people, these women were saying. They just want an idea of where the story's going, and they want to know about themes. So it was a very different message that I'm getting from them. And I had written up a query letter based on what I heard from these women, and I hated the letter because it's tried to squeeze so much plot detail into it, and it took all the themes and what I thought was important in it out. So then as soon as the call got over, I went and rewrote my query letter. And I like it so much better. And I feel like I need to go with what works for me, as opposed to what I'm trying to, because so I'm talking to this woman too. I met at Kauai. She was in my class. She's working on her debut novel. She has an agent, but she had 5 agents offer to represent her. And so we talked a lot about that process on a call last week. And what she pointed out is that the way she picked her among the 5, the way she picked her agent was she asked them what were the major edits they would do to the story. And she based her selection on the person who had the vision closest to hers of what the way of the story would go. She said the first agent who offered, she said, wanted to take it in a very different way that she didn't like. She said, had that been the only agent that offered, she probably would have gone with her. But given that she had the choice, so it was kind of nice hearing that too. And it was something to keep in my head, that if I could get more than one agent to offer, to ask them how they would take the story, or even if I only got one, if it was such a different vision, then would I want to try to keep finding a different agent? And the reason, so I don't know her whole background. Her name's Monica Gupka. she, I guess, was a fellow for the Reese's Book Club. I don't know how she got that because, you know, there's only so much you can cover in a phone call. But she had something to do with Reese's Book Club. And so her first pages and her query were sent to a list of agents that were interested in Reese's Book Club people. So of course she got she got sent to a lot of agents. But anyhow, that was I did a lot of learning
That's
by talking last week. Or
that sounds like those are very much the same, two aspects of the same thing. Like the query letter advice that you're getting is very personal to the agent, and
yes,
matching your trying to find, and this is an interesting thing, like a sidebar here. Last time I was looking for a job, I started trying to put fun stuff in my resume because I didn't want a company that was going to, because I had a job, but I wanted a better job. And I didn't want a company that was going to not, it was going to be one of those companies that was too strict or too, stickler, that was going to show me what kind of a company it was. And I think there's something to that, like with the query letters, you're not just you're trying to find an agent that works for you and works for your story. And if they're not interested because of the way you write the query letter, are they going to be, is that going to really be a good match? You want somebody who's going to match, right? And is the same thing with, what kind of chopping block are they going to put your story on? Like, you don't want them. Is it worth it to get an agent if it's going to destroy the story that you want to tell, right? So there's, yeah, like advice that's based on rules that seem arbitrary because that's just the way that agent or that editor is. I've found will usually have somebody else who's like got the opposite advice, or it seems arbitrary because it is arbitrary a lot of times.
so one thing that it's kind of off this, but it is really. So the two guys that were talking, they both said in one woman's query letter, she put in like a little bit of her story in there because everybody wrote their queries so differently. And she wrote something about the character's steely blue eyes, something, something. And both literary agents said that made them hesitate that she used steely blue eyes because they consider that cliche. And they said if she puts a cliche in her query letter, what is her writing going to be like? So it made both of them hesitate. And I thought, oh my God, I never would have thought about that. And I really have to make sure I don't have any cliches that I use accidentally in my query. Not that it's going to put everybody off, but I just thought that was so interesting that they noticed they're willing to let so many details go, and yet that really bothered them.
Yeah.
It seems like that would put people off though. Like you want, I'm guessing if you're in that situation, in a position that you're reading query letters, you're going to want to see someone's writing, because the worse it is or the more issues that you find, the more you're going to have to work with that person on their writing. And I don't know, that seems to be the case for me. But my main reaction to this is, wow, what a great reason to workshop informally, or maybe even formally, query letters.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of workshopping, you mentioned you have your writing group, and you also mentioned having beta readers.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself getting a different value out of the beta readers than from your writing
Yes,
group?
definitely. My writing group's more interested in craft, and I did get some crossover on places. There's especially one scene that I wrote that made everybody uncomfortable. And it made me laugh that it just did that to everybody. But overall, I would say different kinds of comments. The beta readers were really trying to enjoy the story, whereas the writing group is kind of looking for what needs to be fixed.
We're all miserable writers.
I
We're
did
just
give the beta readers very specific questions to answer. And they brought up other things that I think it depends on the personality of the person. Like, for example, there is a little bit of phone sex in the story. And one of my readers said that made her uncomfortable. But it's she's the only one that it made uncomfortable. And it's just the way, it's just her. So, and things like that. I'm trying to think. I made a spreadsheet with each of the beta readers and the comments that I thought that they made that were pertinent.
yeah.
And so that I can go back then and look at each of these as I'm doing my revisions and see what I want to handle. I would say also, I didn't get anything. One person just kept telling me commas everywhere where my commas was. And she says, I know you told me not to edit because, and there's no point in them editing because it's going to be, it's going to be revised and
Yeah,
the
you're going
commas
to
are going to have to
restructure it.
move and all of that.
Yeah.
So I just didn't want them wasting their time that way.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for this beta reader in particular, I picked her because she speaks Italian and there's Italian in it and it's all about in Italy. So she did give me feedback about things culturally. And she also noticed that where I made a mistake with the way I was saying gin and tonic, because I used it inconsistently. And so things like that, that was from the beta readers. Anyhow, sorry, I'm getting to probably too much minutia here.
That's all right. It's interesting though. Like I think that's different kinds of feedback from different places, and I think that's actually valuable. I've heard that before from some people, but I think a lot of people do assume that it was workshopped with the writing group, and the writing group is this. But then there's also beta readers, where there's developmental editors, and there's a lot of different ways of getting feedback that I have different focus and can improve it in different ways. So,
one of the big things about it is if your writing group, like you guys have your church, they go through the whole story with you and it becomes part of them. Your beta readers are seeing it for the first time. So they might catch things that your writing group doesn't, because you're changing it over time too. And so your writing group is seeing all of this. So your beta group readers come in, they're reading it for the first time all the way through. And they might catch inconsistencies that nobody else caught because they're so familiar with the story.
Yeah.
Or catch things that don't make sense to them because you've changed it so many times. Anyhow, I think that's one of the big differences I noticed is the perspective really changes the more closer you get to the story.
Well, that is very interesting. Speaking of changes, we had kind of been talking a little before the workshop here about changing projects, like when you're letting go of, when do you switch projects? Like I know, like Jack was talking about, he feels like he switches too often from one thing to another thing. But then I know, sometimes that can be helpful for some people, having more than one thing. You have this one, and whenever you're procrastinating on this one, that's actually a perfect time to work on this one, or vice versa. Elisa just had to, she was story chefing. She just had two stories that came out finished. She just finished and shipped off at the exact same time. So obviously she was doing some switching back and forth there, but they were actually,
two novels.
Two novels.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Huge project.
So she had a
Yeah,
left-hand one and a right-hand one that she was working on, right?
yeah.
So,
Not on purpose. Don't do it. Don't try it. It was not. I was supposed to finish one first, but then I had a lot of revisions to make based
how
on
how did you
comments.
how did you prioritize or choose in that case? This is obviously a little bit
Yeah,
unique. When to switch back and forth?
yeah. The thing was, I was supposed to finish my personal project in a year ago,
Mhm.
but then I sent it off to a teacher from the program, and she sent me a lot of notes, which actually some of them I disregarded, but many of them made a lot of sense. So I had to restructure the whole thing, even though I've been working on this manuscript for like 5 years in this version. Not to mention the many versions that came before. Again, knowing when to stop, I think that this one. This time I'll stop. But I hadn't given up on this project because it was
Mhm.
the one thing that I really I have one beta reader, a friend. I tried again. I had to stop looking for advice and comments on it because then I would never stop. So, but I sent it out to one of my daughter's friends who's an avid reader, like 100 plus books a
Mhm.
year, and she's demographic. She's a teenager, so and very honest. So I knew that her feedback would not be like, oh, because you're my friend's mom, then I'm going to tell you nice things about your project. And when she read it, she said, I can tell that this is your, like, you're passionate about this. It shows in your pages. Anyway, so I was supposed to finish that. So, but then I had committed to this other project with someone else. So I had to honor that commitment, but it was a struggle because I had to find. So whenever I send off some pages and she was revising them, then that's when I would work on my own project. But switching from one, and the characters, both characters are YA girls, different ages, but one is 14 and the other is 16, but they're completely different. So it did trample me for a while to try to go back into their heads because they were completely different characters. One is broken and very, so like I don't know, uh unsure and finding herself, and the other one is the complete opposite. She's like go-getter and very she's a survivor of a tragedy, so she's very strong. So it was like, okay, I need to go back and forth. Anyway, I don't recommend it, but if you do, it just helps, like focusing on just getting inside of don't. I found that it was not possible to do it on the same day or even the same week,
Mhm.
so I tried
You had
to
to give each
to
one
put.
its dedicated
Yes,
space,
yes,
dedicated time.
because it was hard to get back into this, especially getting into Andy is my character from my personal project, and she's very very broken, and she's very different from me, like from my personality. So it took me a long time to be able to get into her skin and into her feelings because they were so raw. So, and going back to the other character was a little bit easier, but going back into Andy was took me a while. So I
Yeah.
don't recommend you working on two things at the same time, but if you do find yourself there, then
Mhm.
take your time. Like, don't going in the same day or just thinking that you can switch. For me, it was kind of hard. Um, but at the same time, it gave me, what happened to me is that in working in the co-project, in the co-writing project, I had a lot of feedback from my co-writer
Mhm.
and a lot of suggestions and things that I then took and implemented them in my personal project, and I think that it made my writing stronger. So it was a learning. Both were a learning process. So I actually I don't regret having to
Mhm.
do them at the same time, but I wouldn't do it again if
Mhm.
I had a choice.
And what about like people who weren't like uh, short order chefing like Elisa here? Uh, whenever you're, who else feels like do you get something out of switching? Is there a time when do you I know some people say work on one thing, get it through all the way to the end, but then there are other writers who are very successful who do work on multiple things at the same time. You know, do you just like nose to the grindstone, regardless of whether it's any good or not, work on that first draft, is there a time that you need to step back, step away, and work on something else? Do you find that you shift back and forth too much? When is good to do that?
I definitely shift back and forth, or back and back and back and back too often. Uh, and I say too often because I'm an older writer, and I envision myself writing longer compositions, book length projects, mostly fiction, but some not, and uh, and I've never finished one. And I think there are a lot of writers in my boat. I've never finished one, but I'm a serious writer. I put a lot of time into it, and I've spent a lot of time in my life becoming educated in this, and yet I've never been able to finish a book length project. And I think it's clear that I let go of things too easily. Uh, I I I I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I
Yeah.
know the effects of what I'm doing.
So Jack, I think we've had this conversation before because you sometimes get stuck where you don't know which project to finish. And if you had to pick one and you knew you would only finish one, what project would that be? And I think your projects that I know of are all so good. I That to me would be a really difficult decision to make. And when we talked about it, I remember it was right about, I think it was Christmas time, right before Christmas, because I had just listened to this podcast and Julia Alvarez was on it. Do you remember this story? She had just published it was something, the Cemetery for Unfinished Books, or this, what
Mhm.
was it? Wait, maybe I wrote it down somewhere. Anyway, she was talking about this very subject where she's an older writer and she has stories still to tell and books unfinished, and she doesn't know which one to give her time to between now and the time she can no longer write. And so she wrote a book instead about bringing these stories and literally burying them in a cemetery, and then all the characters come to life. It's a magical realism type of story. And in doing that, she was able to keep her stories alive, even though there were just bits and pieces of them. Anyway, her discussion on this podcast, and I did write, the podcast is called First Draft,
Mhm.
and it was
Cemetery of Untold
December
Stories.
13th. That is it, Cemetery of Untold Stories. So anyway, she
I like that
discussed a
idea.
lot of, so even a well, like she's been very well published and acclaimed, and she still struggles with this. When do we let go?
Mhm.
And, how do we prioritize that sort of thing?
Um, I know we'd had somebody we all know James has talked about. He had a project. They had a project that they were working on um, for quite a while. It was a major project that was the only. Actually, speaking of focus, this was somebody who was only working on this one project and got to the point to where they felt like they needed to just step away and do something else because for various reasons, feeling like that needed to be shelved. And they talked about, very interestingly, the idea of like actually, and I would really love like to kind of revisit this idea at some point of like shrink wrapping this project, like making sure that before this book that they were working on was shelved, that all of it was kind of every place that they were thinking of this, or the details, the notes were kind of put in order, the where this chapter was kind of associated, and the research was all kind of packaged up, and everything was tied up and put a bow on it, and that seems so tidy, and it seems like such a great idea, like of how to, if you do, especially for a long period of time, because this was going to not just be like, oh, I'm going to go kind of canoodle over here for a week. It was definitely a longer shelf life situation. But putting something away for a while, the idea of intentionally kind of packaging it for yourself to pick up again later, some future version of you to come back to later, always struck me as a very, very good idea that I have not actually heard of uh, other writers talking about before. That's just like something they stumbled across and then picked back up again, and they didn't know what they were thinking of. Like Stephen King talking about how he, trying to finish his the Gunslinger series of books, like that,
Yeah, Dark
had
Tide.
no idea where he was leading with it, and having to pick it up and find an ending somehow. Like that's I don't know. That's wise.
You know, and at the same time, for example, in my case, my project, I let it rest for a long time. My personal project, I finished the novel. I worked on it on one of the classes in the master's program, and then I did an independent study on it, and then I let it rest. And I wrote a whole other project besides the one that I co-wrote. I have a whole other novel that I haven't touched in, I think, 2 years. I don't even that's what I'm gonna go back to now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna resuscitate that project that it's been in the back, but it helped me. But I do need to just, I think that, for example, even when I write, or even when I help someone write even an essay or something, I always let it rest for a while and then I retake it. So it's good to have some distance, and I think that it helped in this project, in my person, in this novel, to have been apart from it for a long time, because then I used it in the summer program in the writers residency, and after that's when I again I ran it by you guys, and I did it in the out of the pitch class. And so, and I think that, going back to Jack, that saying that he for me, I had to finish this project because it's like an unfinished task in the back of my mind. I think that that's one of the things that hindered my progress in my co-writing, because it was, I even remember, I was in the hospital for a long time, whatever. And I remember telling my daughters, like, if something happens to me, the manuscript is in this like in this folder. You need to get it out there, because for me it was it is still so important to get the story out there. I hope that it finds a home. I still hope that it gets into the right hands. But I had to finish it. More than anything else that I've ever done in my life, I had to finish that program. That manuscript, that story had to go out. So anyway, that helped me finish it, because I know that if I hadn't, it would haunt me. So but still, I do think that distance helps to be able to
Mm-hmm.
see things from another perspective.
That's really interesting, what you're saying there, Elisa, and it ties into something that I've heard you say before, and that is that you haven't actually submitted much of your work, even though you had done a tremendous amount of work, and I think that ties into like the what should I be working on part of this discussion, like asking that question, what should I be working on, part of this discussion. And I've got the same issue. I haven't done enough uh, uh, of the work of the writer, and by the work part of the writing, I mean trying to get my work published, trying to get people to read my works, and that's part of the change I'm making, that I've decided to make, because Michael, I'm sure you remember that I've got a medical issue that's kind of changed, in my opinion, the kind of stuff I can write, and I've tried a few things since that's the onset of that, and it has uh, everything has failed, and I've written about this in Story Street Writers, um, and one of those articles, a it turned into a major slash minor opportunity. Major in the sense that a person who's helped a lot of writers become well published has an interest in helping me turn it into a memoir, and minor in the sense that she wants to see me do, you know, a treatment of what that memoir would be and a query letter and help me try to, you know, get that out to the right people. So it's big person, small chance of it working out. But I haven't done enough on that. So I'm switching from writing projects to writing work for a little while. I've got another one that I've let me fallow for a while. I met a screenwriter, a major screenwriter, who's given me a minor opportunity. He wants to read a short script I've written and a treatment of that for turning it into a feature film. And he just wants to read it. You know, that doesn't mean he wants to help me with it or work with me on it. But he's written some major works. He's got, you know, one movie that he wrote grossed over $400 million. He is a major person, and he wants to talk to me, and I haven't done the business of that business, and so I'm actually accepting that I'm not going to write something new, and I'm not going to continue to focus on what I have most recently been writing on. I'm switching this week. I decided I'm switching to the business of writing and trying to get things I've already produced out there.
I think switching projects, just like anything else, isn't inherently a bad thing. There's you can there is a problem whenever you are trying to avoid the difficulty that comes with writing by just starting things and not working on them. Like whenever, you know, that when it becomes a place where nothing gets done. And obviously
Yeah, you
it could
called
take a
it
while to get there.
letting go earlier. You called it letting go earlier, and I thought that was the perfect
Right.
term because it's what we do when a pet or a person passes. We have to figure out how to let go.
Right. And I I have actually personally found myself sometimes having two projects helping me because I'll have a productive way to maybe it's like the rebellious teenager in that still exists somewhere in decades past, but the idea of, you know, oh, this is the thing that I have to work on because I'm working on this. Well, now because I have to, maybe I want to work on this a little bit. I don't know. Something about like, oh, I can't get my head around this. I kind of need to noodle on it. Maybe while I'm doing it, I'll work on this one. But as long as there's just like the two tracks and procrastinating on this means working on this and vice versa, at least they're both going forward, right? I guess that's kind of that maybe that's a way that's productive. Like have a procrastination work that you can, you know, moonlight on. I mean, it's all moonlighting when we don't have that's you got a different full-time job, I guess.
I guess it's like we could see it as sunk cost. Like I'm married to a businessman, and so he's like, if you have to write something else, and then maybe you can go back, and maybe if you find if this isn't working, you need to try something else, and maybe then it when you get something out there, then they can revise whatever you had before, and then you can find a place in the world. But trying to keep on working on something because you've been working on it for a long while is the sunk cost. So
That's true.
it's
Sometimes
just
switching could be the healthy thing to do because as writers, we've been known to be a little obsessive sometimes. I mean, some of us, you know, and having that and having yes, having this major piece of your life that's all of this time that you put into it, and you can't think of none of it's wasted. Like even if that story, if the story that you have put time into, you do another story and it gets, doesn't mean that this story was a waste. It you had time, and Elisa froze, and you had time on it, and you learned stuff, and you built things with it, and it's, you lived part of your life doing that, and that's still part of your life regardless of what happens to your work, right? That's, it's not wasted. um there's, she just texted she got thrown out of the internet. That sounds dramatic and bodily, actually. But no, like that can be a healthy thing. Maybe there is a time to let, like James, finding the time to let go of something that you feel like you need to move on. That can be a great, that can be a good thing. People can get too caught up in rewriting the first chapter over and over and over and over and never moving forward. And maybe that's a time to switch. Whenever you find that you can't move forward in other ways. But if it's just the happening too often, I mean, there's two ways to be unhealthy about it, I guess, or there's two ways that it can get in your way. Either not switching when you, not moving away from something and letting go when you need to, or not committing to something and putting um so is there a good way to figure out when each thing is the case? um yeah, I don't know. uh Jack, you're muted again. Let me
Thank you, Michael. A major one for me, um, and I know I'm talking too much, but I'm jumping in because uh, I'm uncomfortable with silence. But a major one for me is, if I've lost my discipline in writing, then that's a clue that I need to look at why. Um,
Mhm.
and maybe that's not a good one, a good reason, but it's my reason. It's what leads me to consider that I might need to work on something else.
um inter- Personal clues, like things that you know about yourself. I mean, yeah, having a little bit of self knowledge, um, finding out enough about yourself, and you have to do enough writing to obviously know whenever this is bothering you in this way. So that's obviously not something starting out might be harder to tell, but yeah.
I kind of think it depends on your writing goals too. I mean, it's so subjective to each person. Every situation is kind of unique to that person's situation and their writing life. For me, because I'm one of the older writers in the group, I feel the clock ticking all the time, about getting my novels out and getting them published while I still can.
Yeah.
And having tried to publish my first novel, which is back with a developmental editor again, but having gone through that and knowing how long the process can take, um, it puts that, for me, it puts the pressure on me to
Mhm.
stick with this novel and try not to do anything but get this novel ready to query, because I know that query process can take me 2 years. And then I might have to self-publish. So for me, it's the ticking clock, but I think it's so different for everybody because we're all in different stages of our lives.
um, I think yeah, there's, I have what Jack was kind of talking about. I think it was Jack. Somebody mentioned something that was kind of reminded me of just like the classic idea of writer's block, like when you're blocked on something and you can't like, and I have heard like, write something else that's a throwaway as a way of breaking that, but maybe having another project to switch to. Um, but even then, a lot of times people think of like writer's block even as just as if it's one thing, whereas there's a lot of like sometimes there's an emotional space that's difficult for a writer to get into with a given work, right? And that can be a reason to not go there. Sometimes there's a problem with your story that's not where you are in the story and it's somewhere else, and you actually need to address it, and moving forward would be wasted work. Even if it's subconscious, that you're working on the wrong part of it and you really need to actually tear something up about it, and you get blocked on that. Like finding out why are you blocked might be a healthier thing than switching in that case. But sometimes switching can give you a little bit of emotional distance to know that. I don't know.
So I had an interesting my my novel, an interesting problem with it is it's part one and part two. And part one is finished now. I mean, it's not finished, but I have so many edits and things I need to go back through based on, church, the notes I've gotten at church and the notes from my thesis director. But I need to write the second half before I can address those things. And I know that. But getting started on that second half, I have a real hard time leaving like, I want to polish it up and say the entire first half is done. But that could change so much based on what happens in part two.
Yeah.
And I just have to trust when you guys tell me, just take the notes and leave it alone. I just have to trust that. But that's what's hard for me.
Yeah. So it's individual, I think. And that's a good example. Like there's definitely some stuff that you might want to change in like the early part. But in that work, for example, I know there's stuff that you will be discovering and will have a structural impact that's going to happen in that second half. And I think that like that it really depends. I don't know. Like I think it goes back to like the what was the writer's quote? Somebody said, I didn't learn how to write by writing a novel. I learned how to write this novel, or something like that. Like every time that you're writing something else, it's different. Like it needs something different from you. Um, so yeah, is there an answer? Probably not. But is there maybe some things to look for, or things to think about whenever you're trying to figure out the answer for yourself? Anyway, we should probably start looking at speaking of wrapping things up and putting it on the shelf, we should probably start looking at this live stream here. So we could probably start going around.
Yeah.
And
Michael, Elisa's trying to get back in.
yeah, I know. I don't think
there
that
a way?
there isn't a actual extra button or anything. I don't know why she's
Okay.
having problems. So, but yeah, I got her text that she got kicked out, but it's should be the same link.
I'll probably jump in because I need to go to physical therapy, start getting ready for therapy.
All
Fortunately,
right.
I think this will be my last Monday to have to do it. But this has been a super helpful conversation to kind of listen to, because I am trying to decide right now which project to. I think just after the thesis, it was so much focus. I haven't really picked up a primary project. It's just been little side things. So yeah, still deciding. I think I'll keep doing that for the next week, and probably honestly for the next little while. But yeah, I think I'll probably drop off so I can start getting ready for PT though.
I'm going to write an article for Story Street this week. I haven't written one in a while, and I think it's a good way to take a little bit of a break from my novel while doing something productive. Um, and then once I write that article, that's going to be my time. Then as soon as I get that article written, I'm going to start back. I'm going to start on part 2.
I'm also going to start an article for Story Street writers, um, for our website, storystreetwriters.com. I've got the column that I write irregularly there, and I'm going to start the an article that's kind of on this topic, and I'm not I'm not pursuing it to try and, I don't have a deadline for when it's going to be finished. Sorry, Michael, I don't have a deadline for when it's going to be finished. But my column is highly introspective, and I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna write to sort out what I think about this, and I know it's going to turn into a column eventually. Uh, and it's a big question for me now. But I know what I'm going to do this week, and what I'm going to do this week is try not to write any of my fiction, which, based on my recent production, is going to be easy to do, to not write any of my fiction, but to focus on the business of writing and try to get my two, what I described as major minor opportunities, to get those pushed along.
That's a
Get
good
something
idea.
in front of the major person who has provided me with the minor opportunity.
Jack, you're a major person too. People, unless this is a giant, physically giant, person, is as
Thank
major
you.
as anyone else here.
Thank you.
So, what's next week look like for you, Margie?
So next week, I'm just going to push on with these revisions I'm making, doing them in chunks. I'm trying to avoid, I changed my beginning, and I found myself spending way too much time polishing the first page, because I think it's really important that you get it done. But then, on the other hand, this meeting last night reminded me that, you don't do your revision by going through the whole document again. You go through by addressing chunks of it before you get any, and polishing is the very last step. So I'm, I'm trying to set a goal for myself, and I haven't decided on what's realistic yet. Ideally, I would love to have the revisions finished by the time I leave for this conference on March 26th, but I don't know that that's realistic at all. It might be more realistic to say June, because I'm traveling the whole month of May practically. Anyhow, so I'm trying to figure out a goal and push forward on my chunks of revision.
I mean, first item in making a list, make a list. First item in making a goal is making the goal. So that could be the first goal. Yeah. So I found we didn't really get to talk about it this week. About like last week's submission party, but I found that very valuable personally. So I actually submitted a couple more things. Not as many, I think, as probably some of the other folks, but I did actually make a couple extra submissions, and I made some little tweaks and edits to some things that I know some of these stories had needed and kind of been neat to get them going. So I actually was dipping into some of my short stories and doing that. I'm about halfway through, or sorry, most of the way through the edits on at least one of the first episode on the podcast, and so I'm going to try and get that one pushed out. It's the other thing that I'm working on. But so yeah, going to be I think minor edits, mostly focused on submission goals. I think this is a little bit switching to the part 2 of writing, and that's the sharing. So that's it for me. Elisa said she's got two short stories to work on that she's going to be adding, editing, or changing structurally. So that's what she's working on.
It's got to be a relief to be working on two short stories instead of two novels.
I think she's just happy to not have like this kind of obligation that she's felt on having, but on both sides of these things. It's obviously that'll come around again. You get more writing jobs. There's probably going to be seasons of that. But enjoy your free time, Elisa. Speaking of free time, I think that's it for us for this week. But we are going to be back again next week. More support group for striving novelists. You can, of course, if you have anything that you would like to share from this conversation, please do so in comments on the archive video here. We'll see you again. Of course, you can see us at storystreetwriters.com anytime and find some of the other articles or topics that we might be talking about over there. So anyway, thank you so much for joining, everybody who was able to join. And we'll see you next time. All right, so yeah, Margie's not. So yeah, Margie's not familiar with the streaming sticking around.